All right, economics. We are back with a lecture. I'm sure you enjoyed all those tax prep tutorials and modules and assessments, but at least you have a better idea of how to file your taxes now, which is something you'll use every year for the rest of your lives now that you'll be, or at least those of you that are graduating and becoming adults and all that. So, this week, our big thing is talking about saving and buying a house, why home ownership, property ownership is important, and all that. At the end of the lecture, I will explain your activity for the week that goes along with this, so don't cut it off right at the end when you think I'm done. Anyways, why buy a house, right? Why should we worry about that? So, basically, you got to have a place to live, right? You can rent or you can buy. Big difference here is that when you rent, you build no wealth. Okay, that is an important thing to think about. In America, the easiest way, or the preferred way, and it might not be maybe the best way if we look at a whole bunch of other factors, but the way you build wealth in America, the easiest, is through ownership of land or a home, right? So when you buy, you build wealth in the form of equity, and I'll explain equity here in a second. But if you rent your whole life, you don't own anything, right? By the end of the time you're renting, you could have paid your landlord, say it's $1,000 a month, you're paying them $12,000 a year. You do that for your entire life, you're paying them hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you own nothing by the end. But if you have a $1,000 mortgage, and you pay that $1,000 mortgage a month for 30 years, by the end of it, you own your home. Home prices have steadily gone up, property prices have steadily gone up in America for the last, century. So by the time you're done paying off this house, maybe you bought the house. My best friend Dan, he bought his house for $150,000. And now it's almost paid off, and it's worth $350,000 because that's how much the property value has gone up in his neighborhood. So you are worth $350,000 instead of being worth nothing, right? Paying the same amount of money. Generally, rent's a little bit lower than mortgages, but not all the time. Rent's going up faster than mortgage prices are going up. So that's the big reason why we push in America to buy a house, right, or to buy property instead of just renting your whole life. So, said you'll build up equity if you buy a house. So equity is wealth that is built up in the value of a home as the home goes up in value and the mortgage is paid down. The difference between what the house is worth and what is owed on the house is what we call the equity. So like I said, my friend Dan, we were just getting out of college, so it was the last big economic recession, the Great Recession in 2008 or so. He buys this place for $150,000, right? He's paying down his mortgage, he's paying down his principal, he's paying all the things you're supposed to pay. But the economy improves, property prices go up. So right now he's got $200,000 worth of equity, at least, right? Because what he was paying for the house was $150,000 and it's worth $350,000. So that's why owning is so much more important. You get that equity, and you can use that equity to refinance your loan. You can use that equity, you can pull some of it out to buy other things if you need to, or whatever. The mortgage, other terms know, mortgage is the loan to buy a house, right? So there's all sorts of loans. You can take out personal loans, you can take out car loans, you can take out construction loans, but if it's a loan to buy a house, it's a mortgage. And there's a whole bunch of other types of loans. But you want a fixed rate loan. Don't get a variable rate loan. Do not, do not, do not. So what that means is this 30-year fixed or a 15-year fixed, that means that when you apply for the mortgage, they tell you what your interest rate is, right? Say it's 3%. If you do a 30-year fixed mortgage, it's going to be 3% for all 30 years. Or for a 15-year one, it's going to be 3% for all those, right? But of course, if it's a shorter mortgage, that means you're going to pay more, right? But you'll pay it off sooner. Anyways, a variable rate mortgage or a balloon mortgage, sometimes they're called, you might get 3%, you might get 1% for the first 5 years, right? And then between years 5 and 10, it gets to be more, it becomes 5%. And then between 10 and 15, it becomes 10%. And then between 15 and 30, you're paying 15% interest, right? That's why you don't want one of those. Then your payments become more and more, and if you get into a worse financial position, then you are screwed. So that's why we tell you to avoid those. You want a fixed rate mortgage. So like I said, there are other types of loans, but they should be avoided. Keep it simple. Keep it simple. Fixed rate mortgage. That's what you want. So, some examples here, right? Between a 15 and a 30-year mortgage payment, right? So a 30-year at 8%, the loan amount's $100,000. You're paying $734 a month. The total interest will be $164,000. So in the end, you're paying a pretty significant chunk of money, right? Savings there, not a lot of savings, because over a 30-year now, the bonus of a 30 years, you got more time, right? More time to work on it, more time. The payment will be lower and that sort of a thing. And maybe you don't make enough money right now, right? Maybe I don't make enough money if I were to buy a house. Maybe I don't make enough money to afford a payment of a 15-year mortgage, so I might go to a 30-year because it's cheaper to pay per month. In the end, you'll pay more, but I can afford to keep doing the things I need to do right now. The 15-year mortgage, you can see there the payment is almost $200 more, right? But in the end, you're going to save some money because you get it paid off sooner, so the interest won't affect you as much. Now, of course, like I said, that's $200 extra. Maybe you can't afford that. Maybe your job doesn't pay you enough to afford that, but you got to make sure, and I'll reemphasize it again, fixed rate mortgage. Fixed rate. All right. So other terms to note, important ones, principal. That's the amount borrowed. So when we talk about taking out a mortgage, right, the principal is that loan amount, the amount borrowed needed to buy off the house. Interest is the cost of borrowing. So like I said, there'll be interest rates. So you might borrow $100,000. That's the principal, but then the interest rate is whatever the interest rate is, 8% or 7% or 6%. Right now, with the Fed cutting rates down to almost 0%, right now the interest rate on mortgages will go down. Like, I'll keep using my friend Dayon as an example. He was able to refinance his mortgage this just a couple of weeks ago because his bank called him and said, hey, you can refinance if you want. And so his interest payment was cut in half. Taxes are yearly, so you'll pay yearly property taxes to the county and the city for your home. Those are used to pay for things within the city and the county. Your property taxes here in Paonia pay for this high school and this middle school. If you were living in Denver, your property taxes would be split up between, or actually your property taxes go to the school that's in your area, right? Insurance, okay, you should get home insurance, obviously, to insure your things in case of emergencies. But you got to also make sure when you're looking into that stuff that you read all the fine print, because some disasters aren't fully covered, and you got to play around with that. Where we are, it's not as crazy a risk of flooding unless you live right next to the river, but you got to look into all those things. You don't want to spend, in the end, right, a few $100,000. I mean, the house is going to be the most expensive thing you ever buy, and you don't want to buy something that expensive and that important to you and then not insure it. Private mortgage insurance is insurance that you pay the bank on insurance for the bank on the loan in case you do not pay them back. If you pay less than 20% down, you have to have mortgage insurance. So, down payments on a house, we might cover it more later in this, but I'll do it right now. So, when you buy a house, generally, let's go back to this slide right here. Generally, you want to put money down, right? You're not just going to go to the bank and say, hey, I need 300 grand. They don't really give loans, or at least not very easily, if you don't have very much to put down, right? Traditionally, they want you to have 20% to put down, right? So they want you, if we're going to say a $300,000 house, they want you to have 20% of that $300,000 when you buy the house, when you are applying for this loan. So what is that? That is 60 grand. They want you to have 60 grand right away. Most Americans cannot afford that, right? That's not a thing that most of us are able to do, right? Even if it was a $100,000 house, how many of us have 20 grand laying around, right? So, that'd be 5 grand. That would be easier, right? But anyways, is it? Double checking my math. No, it would be 20, wouldn't it? Oops. Yeah, it'd be 20,000. There you go. Good math. Nice job, Mr. Chandler. Anyways, if you don't have that 20% to put down, there are all sorts of different programs. I mean, you can put 5% down in this and that, but no matter what other programs you enter, you have to have mortgage insurance, right? So it's insurance for the bank in case you don't pay them back. You could do it through the Federal Housing Authority, the FHA. You could do it through private companies, but you'll be paying that insurance until you get to 20%. Once you get to 20% down, once you paid $60,000 on your $300,000 house or $20,000 on your $100,000 house, then you don't have to pay the insurance anymore. So you're incentivized to have close to that 20% because then you'll be paying the insurance less and less, right? All right, so when should you buy a house? First, if you have enough money, right? Say if you have money saved for a down payment, you've got a good job that can help you pay for some of this stuff, that sort of a thing, right? You want to make sure your credit is in line, and we're going to do a whole bunch of stuff on credit and how to build it later. But when those things are in line and you're in an area that you're going to be in for a while, I would say even more than a year or two. I would say you're in an area where you want to live for a long time. Maybe the rest of your life, but 5-10 years. Then maybe it's time to buy a house, right? So I don't plan on ever leaving Delta County, so we're looking at houses, right? My friend John is doing his residency at Harvard, and as soon as he gets done with his residency and he gets placed to stay there, then he's going to buy a house there in Boston. My friend Dayon, I've talked about, him and his wife just had a kid, so they're not leaving Salt Lake anytime soon, so they bought the house. My friend Sayre's living in Denver right now. He hasn't bought one yet because he's not sure if he's going to stay in Denver. So you got to make sure you're in that position for your life, for your future, that it makes sense to invest $300,000 worth of debt, right? So how much can you afford? One thing here that's important, that first bullet point, the bank will approve you for a lot more than you should buy. They will do the same thing if you ever apply for a student loan, which I'll tell you shouldn't apply for student loans, apply for scholarships or take less college classes and work your way through it like I did because you don't want a student loan payment. But they will always approve you for more than you should be approved for. It's just kind of a strategy that they use to try to get you to maybe buy a bigger house or take a bigger loan so they can make more money on the interest. Other thing to think about is you do not want to be a hostage to your house. You don't want to be what they call house poor. Okay? You want to have enough money to do other things. Enjoying yourself, saving for the future, going on trips, being able to go out to dinner or go to a movie or do fun things without taking on a bunch of extra credit card debt. So what that means is if you make $1,300 a month, right, that's your paycheck, you don't want to buy a house with a mortgage that's $1,000 a month, right? Because you only have $300 left to pay for your electricity, your phone bill, your internet, your gasoline, your food, all of that stuff has to be factored in as we budget here. So the golden rule is you want to spend about a quarter, 25% or less of the money you make per month on your housing. Okay, so if I make $2,000 a month, I want to spend $500 or less on housing. Okay, which isn't always realistic, but that's where you want to shoot for. So, some conservative suggestions here. Do not borrow more than twice your annual household income. So you look at your gross pay, and you don't want to borrow more than twice of that. However, if you're starting out in an industry, right? My first year as a teacher back in Salt Lake, I made $31,000. You can't buy a house for $62,000, right? There's no homes available for that price, at least not in Salt Lake. So that one is a little rough to be able to accomplish. But as you mature, right, now that I'm 8 years into my career, and maybe your wife or husband is 8 or 10 years into their career, then you add up your money, say this is how much we're making. Then it's more realistic to not borrow more than twice of that, right? Your house payment, like I said, should not be more than a quarter of your monthly income. If you can help it, right, it's 25%. So you take your monthly income and you would times it by 0.25 and see what that comes out with. So how much you put down, of course, 20% is best. That's the historic marker that we've set, but most of us aren't going to be able to get there because 20% is a lot of money, especially when the average housing costs are, between $250,000 and $300,000. Having 20% of that is a lot, right? But steps to buying a house, you'll get pre-approved for a loan. So before we even get to that point, like I said, we'll talk about how you can build your credit, right? That's part of getting approved for a loan is to have credit, and we'll get into that later. But you'll go get pre-approved for a loan, right, through a loan agency. They'll run your credit score. They'll do all that sort of thing. You'll decide where you'd like to live. You're probably already living in that area because that's where your job is and all that stuff. You find a real estate agent. You look at homes. You choose the house you want. Then you make an offer, right? So say a house is listed for $300,000. That doesn't mean you have to pay $300,000. You look at how long it's been on the market. You look at other things like if it has work that needs to get done, and you can offer less. You can say, hey, your house has been on the market here for a year. I'll give you $250,000 instead of $300,000. And then you guys can negotiate. They could turn you down. They could accept it, whatever. Big key here, after making an offer, is having the house inspected. Do not have a friend of a friend do it. Have a professional do it. Somebody you don't know, right? Or if it's somebody you do know, it's got to be somebody you know is really, really good at it. Don't just say, hey, my cousin's done this before, let's have him do it, or whatever. I've had friends do that with absolutely disastrous consequences. Find a good inspector to come and inspect your house, make sure everything's in order. Then you get a closing attorney, you close the house, you do a final walkthrough, close on everything, settle it, and you have a house. All right, a couple other terms to know. That'll be on your quiz that's attached with this. Escrow is the account through which mortgage company holds money for and pays taxes and insurance. Foreclosure, say you can't afford to make your house payments anymore, the bank takes back your house, right? That's when a bank, it's like repossessing a house, right? Then they auction it off or whatever. Credit score and rating, like I said, we are going to do a bunch more credit score stuff on how to build it, easy ways to build it. I built mine up in a not particularly complex way, and I'll explain the way I did it, and then I'll give you suggestions that much smarter people than me will have. But inside of your credit score, there's things like your FICO score, your income to debt ratio is a big part of determining what your credit score is going to be. So if you make $30,000 a year, but you've got $60,000 worth of debt, that's real bad. So your credit score is going to be bad. But if you make $30,000 a year and you've got $1,000 worth of debt, that's good. So your credit score will go up. But like I said, we'll focus more on that stuff later in the unit. Now, that's the end of the PowerPoint, but before I turn it off, like I said, I wanted to explain your activity. So, this week, you'll watch this video, you'll take the quiz on this. Then there's a saving for a house activity I want you to do. So, you're going to look at it based on 5 different incomes, but what I want you to do is use Zillow or Realtor or Apartment Finder and look at homes either around here or if, say, you wanted to move someplace else, say you wanted to move to, I don't know, Texas. Look at home prices around where you want to live in Texas, right? Then you're going to see, based on those 5 different incomes, your dream job or your preferred job, the average income for an American, the average income for a Coloradan, the average income for someone that just graduates high school, and the average income for a high school dropout, and you're going to see if you can afford to live there or how much cheaper the house would have to be for you to live there at that income level. After you've done that, okay, then there's a couple of videos or a few videos for you to watch from Crash Course, and that'll be our week. Okay, a little bit less involved than last week. I felt bad giving you guys like 1,000 things to do on the tax stuff. So that's it for this week. If you have any questions, please email me. I'll email you right back. It goes right to my phone. I got it on me all the time. Just as bad as you guys having my phone on me. All right, take care. I'll be back next week with more lectures and all that.